What if God gave people superpowers that were equivalent to the miracles we see in the book of Acts? I'm always kind of trying to strike the balance, and my goal is usually to write thrillers and or science fiction that may not be really Christian, there's not really much Bible in them, but that don't dishonor the Lord. My demons in this book just can't wait to get their hands on politicians. You know, though in those days you printed out the first 3 chapters and sent those out in a physical query letter. That's all long since passed, of course. And it actually did very well. It's far and away my most successful book so far.
Welcome to the Spotlight on Indie SFF author interview series. Today we're chatting with Bowen Greenwood, an Amazon Charts bestselling author of thrillers and science fiction. His experience as a police beat reporter and as a court clerk informed his thrillers, and his lifelong love of science fiction and fantasy led to the Exile War series. You can find more about him at the links in the video description, including his website and social media links. And you can find Seer's Blade listed at spotlightonindiesff.com with purchase links and a link to his website. Good afternoon, Bowen.
Good afternoon. I'm so grateful to be on the show with you. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, it's nice to see the face behind the books.
It's always that way on the internet. It's kind of exciting to put a face to the name.
Yeah, you don't have to travel off some exotic location or any location and sleep in a hotel. You can be right in your own home nowadays, and your audience can meet you virtually.
That's the best part, is connecting with readers.
So you told me you had around 30 books?
It's right around 30, depending on whether or not you count the digital boxed sets or not.
Individual books. How about we put it that way?
Yeah, if we cut out the boxed sets, it's probably more like 25 to 27.
Okay, so you have a lot of box sets then too.
Yeah, well, that's the marketing thing, is once you have a series finished, you do a little digital boxed set, and that makes it easier to sell a little bit.
You find that there's a lot of people who like those box sets? I've kind of had mixed experience myself.
Well, it opens up some marketing channels that might otherwise not be there. You know, you probably have heard of BookBub featured deals, and they might take the first book in the series once, but then it's tough to get back in until you have something fresh. And the digital box set of the whole series kind of makes it easier to get in with them, and that's a very valuable marketing opportunity. So it's worth the effort.
It definitely is. They have a large audience, and you get good results with BookBub.
Exactly. Results are, marketing that works is like the holy grail of indie writing. You're always looking for it.
Yeah, that discovery. We all have to battle that. There's so many books out there. And nowadays, too, I see a lot of things with AI written books. It sounds like Amazon's putting a limit on the number of books you can upload per day or something. I thought I saw somebody post somewhere.
I hadn't heard that. Wow. That probably number of books per day probably says something bad about AI right there. If they're having to limit how many per day, that can't be good.
Yeah, well, it sounds like there's a lot of people making big money off of AI written books, but you and me, we write our books the old-fashioned way. And I'm assuming you're like me, like a lot of indie writers. Yes, it's nice to make some money, but you do it because you love expressing yourself.
I do. I love to write, and I'm not quite as dogmatic about AI as a lot of people are. I don't think it's going to be the end of the world. I don't think it's the best thing in the world. I think it's kind of interesting, but one way or another, no matter what I've seen from it, it never is quite as much fun as writing myself.
Isn't that the truth? Yeah, with so many books out, you have a lot of different genres too that you write in. Tell us a little bit about the different books and the different genres and what they're about. Can you kind of go through that a little bit?
I would love to. Thank you so much for the opportunity. My home base is thrillers. I grew up reading Tom Clancy books as a kid, and that sort of shaped what I like to read and what I like to write. And so my first novel that I published, a lot of people compare it to Tom Clancy, which I consider great flattery, but imitation is the sincerest form of flattery and all that. So my natural home is in spies and detectives and car chases, things like that. I love that stuff. It makes great reading. I'm happy writing it. But I've always been a science fiction fan, all the big famous universes we all know and love, Star Wars and Dune and Lord of the Rings and all that stuff. I've always enjoyed reading that. So I tried my hand at it a few weeks ago, sorry, a few years ago. And the Exile War series was what came out of that. And then every now and then I get the bug to write a little bit of Christian fiction. And that's, the most recent example of that is Seer's Blade that you mentioned earlier. I have a little two-book series that someday I might write the third book for called the Sons of Thunder series. That's a young adult Christian story. It's a pretty simple tagline. What if God gave people superpowers that were equivalent to the miracles we see in the book of Acts? So, for example, in the book of Acts, Philip baptizes the Ethiopian and then is just kind of transported somewhere else. So we have a superhero who can teleport. And at one point they stone Paul, and yet he emerges completely unharmed. So I have a hero who's bulletproof. And it's these young people in the area of 18 years old trying to work out what to do with these gifts and how to do the right thing with it. Like anything else in the world, there's good guys and bad guys who have different ideas about how to do the right thing with it. And it has been compared many times, sometimes favorably, sometimes not, to basically being a Bible based X Man. And that's fair.
Yeah, do you do some sort of Bible quotes in it or something that people are comparing it to a Bible-based X-Men?
there, I have to confess that Sons of Thunder may be one of my preachier books. I come out of a Pentecostal tradition, and there's a lot of talk about gifts not being just for the past and things like that. So it's there's plenty of Bible in it. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's good to have a range. The problem is sometimes I think with the Christian is there's people who they want the hard Bible thumping in their entertainment, but then at the same time they're like everybody else and they just want to be entertained. And you're kind of stuck in between because trying to find that right balance as a
Well,
writer.
it's been a journey for me in terms of kind of figuring out how to put together my faith and my love for writing. When I very first started trying to write novels, and none of those were any good, I did not really know the Lord, and there was a lot of profanity, things like that. And I sort of got rid of all of that when I got to know the Lord and started publishing books. But, how do you put the two together? Because a lot of the mainstream audience doesn't really want the prayer and the Bible laid on too thick. But meanwhile, a lot of the Christian audience does.
Yeah.
So I'm always kind of trying to strike the balance. And my goal is usually to write thrillers and or science fiction that may not be really Christian. There's not really much Bible in them, but that don't dishonor the Lord. There's no profanity, almost nothing, almost no profanity. There's no explicit sex. So I write that in my thrillers and science fiction, where at least things are fairly clean, and a character will send up a flare prayer now and then. But every now and then, I get the urge to write some Christian fiction that serves my church-going brothers and sisters who want to see a little bit of Bible in their entertainment.
That sounds like a nice range that you have going on.
It takes all kinds to make an entertainment industry, and I figure both sides of the audience deserve to have some good entertainment.
That's right. And everyone's got to choose for themselves what they're comfortable with. And I'm agreeing with you in my preferences, but I'm not going to deny somebody else finding a different type of book. But It is nice to know that there's other writers out there who do write, should I say, clean books. And clean, a lot of people think clean means boring, and it is not. I mean, Star Wars is clean. Lord of
Yeah.
the Rings is clean. And those are properties that are super popular. I mean, so there's no reason that other books by independent authors like you and me and other authors out there can't be read by an audience. And it's actually nowadays, I think it's kind of refreshing when we don't have all that other stuff in a book because it's so out there in everything now that you're just desensitized to it almost. And so it's refreshing when you don't have that, I think. You know, somebody can disagree with me. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. I'm not going to force my views on anyone, but I just happen to think that it's really nice when I can find a book. And now I know, you have those and hopefully other people will agree and give them a chance. And we can talk a little bit more in detail here because I want to know about Seer's Blade too. You know, I can see the description and stuff, but for somebody who's looking, you want to talk a little bit more about the characters and what's going on in that book?
I would love to. Seer's Blade just kind of takes a concept that I think a lot of believers will be familiar with, that you fight demons with the sword of the spirit, and literalizes it, puts it into the real world. You know, what if demons were walking down the streets as physical beings, and a sword of the spirit was an actual blade that appeared in your hand when you spoke the right Bible verse for you? And so Ewan Baxter is he's a political staffer. He works in Washington D.C. and kind of discovers that he has this gift and doesn't really have any kind of serious faith and has to go on sort of a journey of getting to know who he is and what the Bible might have to say to him before he can wield a blade of his own and save the day.
So do you have people walking around who know they can do this, or is this something that you have to be a specific type of person to wield one of these blades?
So I just called them seers, people who can see the spirit world. And nobody necessarily knows why or how you get the gift, but some people have the gift of seeing the spirit world and others don't. Ewan discovers that he does and meets a mentor and a sort of a fellow seer who's a little bit further down the road of learning this art than he is, but not ready to be a mentor yet. And together, the three of them have to foil an evil scheme in which the demons are trying to gain more influence amongst powerful people.
Okay, I'm going to get into the more of the conspiracy theories here, and maybe it's from interviewing PR Infidel and her conspiracies. She's got, yeah, she's got quite a mind for that. But for this, do you bring any sort of like real world politics into this that affect these seers, and or is it just kind of more in a fictional people?
So, my day job is politics. My position is an elected one. I have to run for office every 6 years. And before I was elected to this job, I worked on other people's campaigns for a rich and varied career.
Oh, wow.
Too many years to count. So, when I talk about DC and the way things work there, you'll definitely hear my own life experience coming out about what it's like to be a staffer, what it's like to have your whole career hinge on somebody else's success or failure. And Ewan is in that world. His boss is a member of Congress running for the U.S. Senate. And if she wins, then he prospers too, and his career takes a giant leap forward. But if she loses, then he does not prosper and will end up in the unemployment line looking for work. And that's, every single person who's ever been in politics knows that level of anxiety. It gets to all of us. We all know the saying, right? Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah.
So folks who are in the power industry, if you will, are a ripe field, a target rich environment for demons. And my demons in this book just can't wait to get their hands on politicians.
When you look at our real world politics, you can pretty much see that how easily that would be made into the type of story you've developed. And you being, like you said, in politics, you have, I'm sure, some interesting insights that you draw upon.
Well, again, that's not this is a saying everybody's heard, right? What you know. And it's easy for me to write about politics because I spent so long working in it. I know how the people in that field, how they think, how they do life, how they're going to evaluate problems. You know, are the main character of Seer's Blade, Ewan. He's he's mostly concerned about not looking crazy. You know, all this
I
stuff
can
about
imagine.
demons and spirit worlds and swords. It's going to make terrible headlines if it ever comes out. You know, that's the kind of thinking that you would expect to find in people who work in politics.
Well, when you're in the public eye and so much of our society doesn't believe in God, I can imagine people would look at you a little funny if you say you're drawing a sword and actually stabbing at demons.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the point. Is people would look at him funny, and which is his big fear at the start of the book is valuing his career more than anything else. And I mean, as far as the real political world, people kind of expect you to have faith, but have it in its place, not be out of control, not be a weirdo about it, not be a quote unquote Jesus freak. You know, you're supposed to go to church, you're supposed to hold a Bible when you swear an oath of office, but you're not supposed to let it get out of control or let it take over. Which, of course, if you really do believe, then
Right?
it should take over and you should be out of
It's
control.
supposed to be your lifestyle as
Yeah.
a believer.
So
Yeah.
it's a again, the book really has a lot to do, or as much as I could give it to do, with real world politics.
Okay. I'm assuming you draw a little bit on that thriller writer preference of yours.
You know, that's kind of my home base. That's where I go to. If I find that a part of the book is getting boring and I'm not very interested in it, just have somebody start chasing them or have somebody get killed. um, So yes, our heroes spend the first half of the book running and hiding and running again, trying to stay away from the demons, trying to stay one step ahead of them while Ewan gets his head screwed on straight before they can start doing anything with it. You know, that just works for me. It's what comes naturally when I write. Most of everything I've written recently starts with some kind of violent crisis breaks out inside the first chapter, and our hero is on the run. It's a good way to get a book started. It comes easily to me, and it starts that way in Seer's Blade too.
And I'm sure I haven't read it, but I'll bet from talking to you here that it doesn't slow down until the end either, I bet.
Lord send it so. That is certainly my goal. I desire to write books that people can't put down, and I like you know, you got to have some introspective beats. You got to stop and have people think and have people talk. You got to have a moment where Ewan and his mentors stop to kind of try and talk through what he needs to learn, which incidentally is what the reader also needs to learn, which is why this type of story works so well for world building. And so you do have to have some introspection, but not too much.
Yeah,
Action is better.
right. Yeah. So sticking with the writing aspect of it, and you said 25 individual books about, I'm sure there's more coming. How long have you been
Sometime in the next
writing?
couple of months here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I have. I've been doing. I've actually been very satisfied with a about one book every 3 months release schedule, and I've got one that's finished and that I hope to have out this summer.
So how long are the books running then if you can do them every 3 months? What's the word count on that?
So actually, the most recent one, which is called The Hardest Drug, and it's pure spy thriller, is a little short. It's really more of a novella than a novel. It's
Oh, okay.
38,000 words.
Okay.
And I emotionally struggled with that, whether I was doing my job as a writer, whether I was providing my people with enough entertainment at that length. I am usually happier to write somewhere between 50 and 60,000 words per book. But
Okay.
that was when the story was finished. So that was it.
The problem that we've seen in the past with a lot of traditionally published books is it seems like they were trying to pad up the word count and then you would get, boring narrative in them. But
Yeah.
as
And
indies, sorry.
no, I was just going to say, I agree with you. It seems like, especially in the science fiction and fantasy world, people feel like you must have 100,000, 200,000 words. And no thanks. I'm probably not going to read that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and especially if they're trying to hit a certain word count, the best advice that I ever got as a writer, in when I was starting out was write what the story needs.
Hmm.
That's your word count. Don't try to pad it up. Don't try to strip it down. Although a lot of times you can strip it down and make it a lot more intense too, because then you get rid of a lot of the stuff you don't need. But the basic advice still works. Just whatever that story needs. Don't worry about hitting any goals. Just make it a good story.
Exactly. Write the story, and the word count will take care of itself.
Right? So how long have you been writing then?
I made my first attempt to write a novel a long time ago. It would have been about 93 or 94 that I first tried it. Yeah, that one was terrible. It's never seen the light of day. I think I might still have a paper copy of it in some old box, but though in those days you printed out the first three chapters and sent those out in a physical query letter. That's all long since passed, of course. My next serious try that I actually finished was in 2002. I finished a book called Death of Secrets, and I came very close, not quite, but very close to getting that into the traditional publishing system. I found an agent, we shopped it around, we got some bites from publishing houses, but at the end of the day, it never quite made it across the finish line. The years went by, I was still writing, I was still working on other stories, but sometime around 13, I started to feel like maybe self-publishing it would be the right thing for me to do. And so in 14, I cleaned Death of Secrets up, tried to adapt it to the modern world because it had been written before cell phones, and cleaned it up, adapted it to the modern world, and put it out there. And it actually did very well. It's far and away my most successful book so far. Actually, I have one that's coming close to it now, but
Is
it
that what I see over your shoulder? The picture over your shoulder? Is that the cover of it?
hang on while I mess with the camera here.
There.
The green one is Death of Secrets. That was back in the days when it was a little easier to get into BookBub, and the Amazon algorithm was a little easier and worked a little differently. And Death of Secrets actually was the number one best-selling political thriller on Amazon for a while, which was pretty
Oh,
cool.
wow.
Political thriller is a very competitive category. It's almost to the level of romance. I get to put best-selling novelist in my author biography. It's all good, but as every single indie author knows, best-selling novelist doesn't actually mean you're James Patterson, right? It's
Right.
not all immediate limo rides. I just discovered that I loved it. After that one experience, I loved telling stories. I loved making up worlds, and kept putting out new books, and first in that series and then in a new series. And one book eventually became 25.
Still a little bit that I have questions about, though. So, in the information, you said that the Exile War is your attempt to fix a lot of the things that went wrong with Star Wars. So that interested me. So now I have to know more.
So the Exile War series is my pure science fiction series, and I started with a real annoyance I had with the Star Wars prequel trilogy,
Okay.
The Phantom Menace, The Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith, which is that the force sensitivity, is clearly telegraphed to be an inherited trait in the original series. We have quotes from Obi-Wan Kenobi like, "The Emperor knew, as I did, that if Anakin were to have any offspring, they would be a threat to him." It's supposed to be an inherited trait. And if you have an inherited superpower that passes from parent to child, the single stupidest thing you can possibly do is make those people take a vow of celibacy. It's
Yeah.
idiotic. You need
Yeah.
them to have children. So this bothered me until I set to work inventing a universe where people with the inherited superpower were sort of sent the opposite direction. Instead of requiring a vow of celibacy, their order arranges marriages between gentle hands, between members of that order, working towards the strongest gifts and the best compatibility. And from there, we get what I like to think of as my attempt at the story of Anakin and Padme, sort of a tragic doomed love, but not because anyone took a vow of celibacy, but rather because both of them were promised to someone else, had an arranged marriage with someone else. It gives you a lot of room to work with in terms of drama and forbidden love, all without what I thought of as a gaping plot hole. I am obviously only the latest in a very long line of people to complain about how the love was done in Attack of the Clones. So I did my best at
Yeah.
doing better. I don't know. The romance is the most heavily criticized part of that series, so maybe I'm not any better at it than George Lucas. I don't know.
You know what though? If you're pushing the romance and you're not a romance writer, you run a lot of risks of attracting the wrong type of reader. And then those romance readers have very set expectations. I know I have a friend who writes romances, so I gleaned a little bit from her, but part of it is which audience you're hitting, whether people like it or not.
And so the Exile War series, it's interesting because I did not really want to write a romance novel in the terms of that genre, right? Romance itself has some specific beats that I'm sure you're probably aware of if you have a friend writing it. You
Yep,
got to have the quote unquote the meet cute. You got to have the black moment where everything looks like it's going to fall apart. You got to have the happily ever after or happy for
yep,
now ending. And that was never the goal. This was always going to be a tragic love story, more along the lines of Romeo and Juliet than a happily ever after. But I made a lot of bad decisions with how that novel was structured in terms of marketing. And one of the
yeah.
worst decisions was the first novel in the series actually does read like a romance novel. It's structured to hit all those beats that romance readers want. And I did actually catch exactly the kind of reviews you're talking about, where romance
Hmm.
readers were like, this is more of a war story. I don't really like these sequels. So,
Yeah,
if you're going to write romance, you want to deliver actual romance, which the romance readers want.
right. And then when it comes to series, they want the same thing in book after book after book. They don't want it changed up. It sounds like you're kind of like me too. It's like, okay, I've got my characters together, but let's go on with the rest of the plot, right?
Yes, I feel exactly that way. And that's something I'm struggling with those spy thrillers right now is that those were, again, I tried to write what they would call a romantic suspense novel, like
Okay.
half romance and half thriller. Came out more two-thirds thriller and one-third romance, but whatever. And then the problem is, after you got them together in the first book, how are you supposed to hit the same romance beats all over again when they're already together?
Right.
So,
Exactly.
I'm kind of coming to the conclusion that maybe I'm just not meant to be a romance writer.
I know I'm not, so it's okay to admit that. Which book is your favorite that you've written? I know it's like trying to ask you to pick which child is your favorite when you're a parent, but if you had to choose and why, is it something to do with the characters? Is it something to do with the writing process? Whatever that may be.
Yeah. So the one I would easily call my own emotional favorite is the second book of the Exile War series. It's called Legion of Traitors. And I like that specifically because I set out to tell a tragic love story. And that's the one where, number one, the tragedy happens. It's the fall of Earth. The war comes to Earth. Our order of quote unquote Jedi Knights, if you will, the gentle hand, their order falls, their temple falls, and our male lead winds up on the good guy's side of the war, and the female lead ends up on the bad guy's side of the war. It's kind of the fall of the Jedi Temple from Revenge of the Sith, or the Siege of Gondor from Lord of the Rings. It's meant to be a huge final battle, and I just really love not just the ginormous military battle at the end, but the way that relationship falls apart. See, Legion of Traitors is easily my favorite of all the books I've written. And if you gave me a little leeway, I might say that entire first act, I call it, the first half of the Exile War series, is the story I set out to tell. It's a story of, it's a science fiction universe, but in that universe, I'm telling the story of a young man who is really a womanizer and looks at women as a way for him to get happiness, becoming a real man, a person who sacrifices for his family and his loved ones. And it's a story I love. It's a story I believe in. And if I somehow managed to be remembered for that book, I would be a happy man.
Is there something in particular about tragedy that you think really hits those emotional points that might be why you like this? Because I
You
found,
know, this is
sorry,
we talked a little bit ago about faith, and the Exile War series is by no means Christian fiction, but it certainly expresses a lot of values that any believer will find familiar: a life of service, a life of obedience, and in fact, almost every human knows, but every believer knows why. There's pretty much nothing nobler that a person can do than to lay down his life for his friends. And done well, that is always a beautiful story. It's, if I may, it's one of my big criticisms of John Lennon's famous song Imagine. Nothing to die for is actually not a beautiful world. There is no greater love than to lay down your life for your friends. And the story of someone who learns how to make that choice is beautiful to me. So I'm always attracted by those stories whenever I see them. You know, you see them all the time in literature for men of you guys go on, I'll stay behind and hold them off. And every time I see it, I like that story.
I guess I hadn't realized that. And I do like stories like that myself, now that you mention that, because and as a Christian, I think it's because that we are made for love. And as you said, there's no greater love than to sacrifice yourself for another, just like our Lord did.
Amen. Yes, exactly. So anyway, that's kind of the story I was trying to tell is an immature man learning how to really sacrifice. And I love that book because that's kind of the heart of his journey. And I love that whole first act of the series because it's telling that story. And I love all of my books.
Right?
While I'm writing them, every book is my favorite.
Right.
But in retrospective, that's always the one that I really truly love.
Yeah. I think every author kind of, even though we say, yeah, we love all of our stories, I think there's always one that really hits us most and for a particular reason. Do you find that you get very emotionally attached to your characters as you're writing them? Do you get involved?
I do. Sort of a mostly finished series of mine is the Sherman Iron Mysteries. And, I reached a point where I had a couple of different characters in those stories who I liked and I was enjoying them. And the story, the plot, really needed somebody to die there. Or alternatively, somebody to betray the hero and turn out to be evil. And that was hard in all of those cases that I can think of, because like in the Iron stories, Iron is a reporter who just kind of plays the role of the private investigator in those stories, and the county attorney is a character who I originally intended to be his girlfriend. It didn't work out because the readers liked somebody else, but when she eventually met her demise, that was very sad for me because I liked that character.
Yeah, yeah. My thought process are going here a little bit because as a writer, I have same thing going on in my head when I'm writing characters, and I'm trying to think, do you have a hard time sometimes really hurting your protagonists, making them go through a lot of pain, or knowing that because you probably know what's going to happen to them in the end, or does that kind of you think makes it a little easier to put them through those challenges?
Well, I've actually been really working with this and thinking on this as I wrote the last thriller, The Hardest Drug. It's not enough just to have something bad happen to the character. It has to move the story too. You
Right.
know, you can't just have them hurt. It has to do something to the plot, something to the big bad that they're trying to prevent. It has to have something to do with finding or hiding the MacGuffin. I don't believe in pain to the characters purely for pain's sake. Everybody has a lot to say about George R. R. Martin, and I would have a lot negative to say if I ever met the man. But
You're not alone.
one thing that you can learn from him, or a lesson that I would recommend that people take away from George R. R. Martin, is readers get a lot more invested if characters they love are in real danger. That decision at the end of the first book to kill off that one huge major character really changed everybody's experience of the books and created a level of suspense that is just not there if your characters aren't going to go through some bad stuff. So yeah, I don't believe in pain for pain's sake, but I do believe that readers invest more if the characters are in real danger.
Yeah. I've noticed recently that there have been people discussing that too online. Apparently, there's certain genres where, or maybe it's current writers in these younger generations that they haven't really had to suffer. Like you and I grew up in the 80s and such, and we didn't have the internet, we didn't have all these conveniences, and generations before us had even less. We knew what it was like to live with less and to have to work harder for stuff and not have everything right at our fingertips. You probably like me, you stayed out till after dark. Your parents said once the street lights come on, make sure you're home. That kind of generation. So,
Yes.
and we'd ride our bikes across town and be like, okay, we're gonna go to the store way down across town and we'll be back about this time. Your parents would just be glad that you came home. Or you'd go to your friend's house, you'd call and say, I'm at so and so's house. But anyway, no cell phones, none of that kind of technology at our fingertips. We actually got out and played. Yeah. So with these generation of kids, they don't really know what suffering is. And I don't know if they're just not comfortable putting their characters through those challenges that push them to grow, or if they've been indoctrinated, it seems like, to see the world in such a negative light that they just have no hope. And so why grow? When it comes to putting characters through suffering, as you were describing, it's also, I think, it should have the purpose of pushing that character growth one way or the other. And some are going to be falling, and some are actually going to take it as a challenge to improve and to do something better.
I think that's a good point. I actually have a mutual on X who posts very passionately, sort of on the opposite of what we've just been talking about wanting stories that are fairly bright and where the suspense comes from how is the hero going to win this, not will the hero win, not will the hero survive or die, will the people around him get hurt. This person is really more interested in stories where they know the good guys are going to win. They just want to see how it happens. And, much like we were talking about with people who want the spice or the steam in their books, takes all kinds. Everybody's entitled to want to read the kind of stories they want to read. If you're never worried that your good guys are in for complete and utter defeat, then to me, the suspense is gone.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it does help add a little bit more realism in a way, because even with superpowers, we're still mortal. There's still going to be a way to, kill somebody unless they're a god. I mean, if you got a god in your story, most
Is
most stories with a god isn't like the true god that created everything, and so they've got some sort of weakness. If you've got some character that can never be brought down, well, then it's kind of like they're too powerful. They don't necessarily have to die, but you have to know they can be hurt.
Yes, exactly.
That thought brought me back to Seer's playing with the demons. And I have another question then. Since they are
Absolutely.
demons, do you bring spirituality into it other than just fighting demons? Do you have, something with the churches or angels or any, obviously demons are fallen angels, but do you have anything like, the other side of it in there?
So the way the world building works is demons don't like churches. They'll go in there if they have to, but they don't like them. I have a quote near the end of the book, which I'm very proud of, where one of our main characters has an ordinary human bad guy at the point of her sword and says something to the effect of leave and don't come back until your knee bends and your head bows and you get on the narrow path. which, a believer should recognize that language.
Yep.
But I did my best to put it in a way that believers will recognize and enjoy, but that would be a little bit more accessible to folks in the mainstream.
That's what I was interested in, because I'm kind of circling back to what we were talking about earlier with it, but our whole discussion has kind of brought me back to that. And so you're trying to keep it a little more comfortable for the secular readers.
I originally wanted to enter this book in the self-published fantasy blog off. Didn't make it through the lottery, so it's not in there, but I'll try again. And, I would be shocked if an explicitly Christian book won that contest. But, I wanted at least to be accessible to those judges for them to be able to read it without gagging themselves the whole time, even though, certainly good for them one way or another.
Yeah, I don't know what those judges prefer. It's just for fantasy, right?
The fantasy one is just for fantasy. There's a science fiction one too. The science fiction one was a little bit newer, and we'll see what its future may hold after they got themselves into a political fight.
So I just have a couple general questions I was going to ask you. Everyone's got to ask a writer, what advice would you give to someone starting out today? Because we have a lot of new writers out there, and people are getting starting out new who didn't go through the early 20 teens like you and I did, and possibly even earlier than that. It's a totally different environment now in publishing and even indie publishing. What have you learned that you think authors should know at this point?
So, my gosh, I could give advice all day. I'm going to do my best to limit myself, though. Know yourself. Know why you're writing. We all, when we write our first book, think we're going to be the next Tom Clancy or the next James Patterson or the next mega best-selling author. We all think it's going to get picked up by the big five. It's going to become a huge international bestseller, and I'm going to be taking baths in money and riding to the opera and limousine. We all start out thinking that, but if you actually want to get rich writing books, you have to make some decisions that you might not like. You pretty much have to write steamy romance if you want to make six figures on books right now. It's almost the only way to do it, except for being very famous. Whereas, a lot of people in my own world just feel like they need to put their testimony down on paper. And I'm like, you know what? Great. I will help you do that, but make no mistakes about how many copies you're going to sell. So, my first advice to somebody who's entering the world of writing is know why you're doing it. If you're really doing it because you want to get rich, then you need to make some changes or adapt your writing in a way that will get you rich. If you really want to tell the story you've got on your heart, then do that. But understand that it's not going to sell itself. You don't just put it out there and word of mouth spreads and you're a bestseller. It doesn't work like that. The best advice everybody has already heard: get a good cover. It's your primary selling tool. Start an email list. I tell people all the time, folks may follow you on X for whatever reason, but if somebody finishes your book and sees the link at the end to sign up for your mailing list and clicks that, there's one and only one reason they do that: because they like your books and want more. And those are exactly who you need to know. Get a good cover, start a mailing list, pay an editor. That's the hardest part. Most people who are self-publishing don't have the money to pay an editor what they're going to charge. And if you're not going to pay an editor, use the holy living daylights out of all the free tools you can get for catching that stuff. It's still not going to be as good as an editor, but absolutely pay an editor if you can. And if you can't, edit as hard as you possibly can, because typos will absolutely get you one-star reviews, and that will take away from your sales. And then don't make huge marketing expenses until you're ready. If you've got one book and only one book, and you put it in BookBub and pay them their $600 or whatever it is they want for whatever category you're in, that's fine. If you wrote the right kind of book, there's a good chance you might make a profit. But you'd make a lot more of a profit if you had an email list, you had sign up links at the back of the book, you had 5 books in the series. So don't jump into big marketing expenses before you're ready, is another important piece of advice.
That's good advice. I've learned a lot of that over the years as well. So I'll just say thanks for sharing that with anybody listening here. Is there anything that you'd like to add? Any other books that you'd like to mention?
I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here. Thank you, really, for having me on the show. I'm sure you'll get all the website stuff posted up on the screen, but let's see if I can do this. It's just my name, bowengreenwood.com. I'm really grateful for the chance to talk about the books today. Thank you so much.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time for this. I'm going to close that out here, and thank you for everyone listening. So remember to check out the description below the video and check out Bowen's books.
Thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you.